I don't want my brother to visit me anymore. I still remember that night when we were kids and lying down in our beds at 1 a.m. without being able to sleep. We made a pact. The one that died first would make every possible attempt to come back and tell the other one what happens after you die. And no matter what it could cost us, we will return. It was something we would remind ourselves from time to time during our time together. Me and my brother were always very close to the point that people would think we were twins. We dressed the same and be together all the time. And something strange we developed was that we would always know what the other one was thinking or what he was going to say next, something that I guess is normal when people spend that much time together. Tragedy came to our family some years later when my brother passed away because of a car accident, and I felt in a way like my life, or at least a big part of myself, was also gone. Never before did I felt this type of overwhelming loneliness because he was someone I thought I would always had with me, and in just an instant, he stopped existing. That night during the wake, I remembered our agreement, but I didn't give it that much importance as it was just something I remembered fondly. I got close to the casket to say my goodbyes, and I wished him well, and if there is anything after this life, then he would enjoy it. The next days were difficult for me because the emptiness is something you can't explain, but you can feel it in with you. Years passed and life keeps moving on, and even though sometimes I would remember him, the more time it passed, the less he was present in my mind. Life just keeps substituting dead people, and even the feelings start to go away from our memories. I remember the first time it happened. I couldn't sleep that night, so I just stayed there in my bed alone with the lights already turned off, but my eyes opened and I started to get that feeling that someone is watching you, a feeling I can't explain, but we all have had it at some point. I was scared without knowing exactly why, and I felt my heartbeat getting faster and faster. I heard some steps on the next room, and I hesitated for a second, but I assured myself that the outside door was locked, so I looked around and noticed how the mirror in the wall was fully black, like if it had been painted, so that no reflection could come from it. At that moment, I heard how the steps were getting closer and closer to my bedroom door, and slowly the door started to get open, like if I was being open with precaution. I didn't have any time to have a reaction, so I just stayed frozen in the bed waiting and wishing everything was just my imagination. I wanted to know who was outside my door, and when the door fully opened, I was shocked. It was him, my brother, in the same form as I last saw him many years ago, like if time didn't pass for him. He entered the room, and when our eyes crossed, he gave me a big smile. Even though it was a big smile, I knew him enough to realize there was no real happiness behind that smile. He walked into the room and sat down in a chair and stared at me with his big fake smile. He seemed happy in a way, like if he had finally fulfilled his promise of returning after so many years, and I must accept that after my initial scare at that moment, seeing him in front of me again made me feel so much happiness. He didn't have to say anything because I knew that smiled and what it meant, so I sat down in the corner of my bed enjoying the moment with him finally being together again, just like we had planned many years ago. Neither of us made any attempt to communicate with each other because it was as if the both of us knew what was happening, and soon after he stood up and walked straight into a corner of the room that was the darkest area of the room, and he went into the shadows and disappeared. That night, I couldn't sleep remembering all the time we had spent together and had this feeling of security, like if I had realized that I was not alone in this world anymore since my brother was still with me, and I didn't know if I would see him again, but I knew he was watching me. Years passed, and it sounds strange, but I had almost forgotten the event, and I must admit that a part of me always felt that it was just a dream. My life had changed a lot during this time. I got married and divorced, and in the middle part had a son that now took most of my time when he was with me, and it was around this time that he came back. I had days without being able to have a good night's sleep, and I started to feel like someone was watching me during my restless nights lying in bed, and I would say to myself that it was just insomniac paranoia to keep myself calm, but deep down I knew what was coming. That night while I was trying to fall asleep but had my eyes wide open, I saw this movement outside my window that I couldn't see exactly what it was because of the drapes being closed, but it was a big object that suddenly stopped in front of the window. I was in an almost unconscious state, like when you are about to fall asleep and can't move anymore, but you are still hearing clearly what is happening. I was about to get up from my bed when I saw this light coming into my room from the window, and it moved inside until it touched a mirror. There was this hitting sound on the mirror glass like if it had been touched by a coin, and that took me out of my semi-unconscious state. I looked around, but I didn't see anything different until I realized that the mirror was not reflecting anymore, and it was only showing solid black color. I felt again his stare on my back, so I turned around and I could see him between the shadows of the dark corner. He spoke, and I noticed that his tone had changed to a more low tone, like a more mature voice, even though his pauses and rhythm was the same as I remember him. "Help me," he said without doing any movement, as if his image was just a memory of mine, but he might not actually be there. His tone was soft and calm, but there was some desperation in it. "It is cold here, and it is always dark." The room was extremely silent, like if time had froze, and there was no sound of any kind being produced at that moment. I started walking towards the darkness of the room when I heard my son crying, and his sound made me come out of this state of isolation, feeling like if all of a sudden I was in control again. And I found myself standing, but didn't remember exactly why I was there. So I turned the lights on and didn't saw anything out of place. I went to the crib and picked up my son and hold him until he fell asleep again, so I lay him down and turned the lights off. I returned to my bed, and immediately the feeling of being watched returned. So I closed my eyes, trying to forget everything, when I heard this very soft murmur my way. "I want to rest now." I felt like if he was talking just in front of my face, and I could even feel his warm breath touching my skin. I wanted to believe I was just dreaming, and kept my eyes closed. "I need your help. Can you help me?" Almost as a reflex, I moved my head affirmatively, and I opened my eyes, but I couldn't see anyone in the room, so I closed them again. "Remember when we used to play in the backyard of our grandma's house? That time when we decided to hide, and it took our parents hours to find us, how angry they were, and said they had almost called the cops to notify we had been taken?" I felt how my brain got filled of satisfaction for an instant by him sharing with me this moment we had lived together so much time ago, and I felt such joy of having him back again with me. Without opening my eyes, I responded, "Do you remember that Christmas night when we decided to secretly open our gifts days in advance, just to see what every box had inside? How our stupid little cousin found out and got us punished the whole season?" I heard his laugh again, just as I remembered it, with the same innocence that he still had, and I felt this profound relief, because I was sure now he was my brother back with me. "I need your help fast. Put this coin under your son while he is sleeping." What he asked scared me, and I immediately opened my eyes, and for my surprise, there was an old coin over the blanket. It was heavily used but had no identifiers, just a round piece of old metal, and I did not understand what was happening, so I quickly turned the lights on and looked around the room, focusing on the crib where my son was still sleeping. I thought if I should put the coin beneath him just to help my brother, because I knew him too well and knew he wouldn't dare hurt my son. He sounded so desperate, but I decided not to do it and turn the lights off. "You are not going to help me?" he asked me in a very saddened tone, but from there on he started to sound angry and accusatory. "I'm here because of you, because of your idea, and now I can't go back. Now they're following me." I did not understand anything. Who could be looking for him, and for what reason? Who or what was he running from? I decided not to say anything and just kept my eyes closed. He was now yelling at me, and I felt his breath crushing against my face like if he was just in front of me. "I need him. Give him to me. They are looking to me, and they will find me. I was not supposed to come back." I kept my eyes closed, and his voice just disappeared after that. Some weeks had passed when he returned. I was in my bed with my son sleeping in his crib next to me, and since that last encounter, I really wished all of it was just my imagination and that it would never happen again. I turned off the lights, and immediately I could see a dark silhouette sitting on the corner sofa. The night lights from the city entered the room through the window, and in that almost full darkness, I could see his eyes reflecting the light, making them the only visible thing in the corner. I got scared when I saw that figure, and those shining eyes moving slowly from one side to another until they finally stood still, focusing on me. I turned the lights on, and there he was again, but he was different. Even though I recognized him quickly, he was also older at an age he never got to be alive. Our eyes looked at each other, and he smiled at me, and just after that his eyes started to wander again, looking at the room. I tried to get up of my bed, but I felt very dizzy and almost fell, and in those movements, trying not to go down to the floor, I knocked off a glass of water that was next to my bed, and I realized how the water started to go from the cup up to the ceiling drop by drop. As I lay down on the bed. He didn't move at all, like if he was stuck on that chair. He started talking to me without looking at me. He asked me if I remember past events we had together when we were children, and he seemed to remember very clearly all these events, but there was something unsettling in how he spoke without any emotion or expression. Everything spoken in the same monotonous tone without looking at me, only moving his eyes, but not knowing where to lock his eyes to. "I need your help, brother." Something was really off this time, so I just stayed quiet. "Help me. You only have to repeat after me." I got scared seeing how his eyes were now completely black, and he started saying things in a language I did not understand. If he was in problems, I wanted to help him in any way, so I started repeating the noises he was making until I decided to stop doing this since I had no idea of the consequences. "Brother, do not be afraid. I will never hurt you." He said this in a completely different voice, like if he was a different person now. "Just repeat after me. It's from the Bible. It will help me finally get some rest." I completely stopped in horror when I saw how a group of people had now appeared in the room standing next to him. They were all dressed in different styles of clothing and seemed to be of different ages. I still felt very weak, and I felt I couldn't distinguish what was real and what could I just be hallucinating. So I closed my eyes for what it felt like a second, but when I opened them again, I saw my brother had stood from the chair and was moving directly to the crib and looked at my son sleeping. "Repeat after me," he told me. "You have to hurry. They found me." I stayed quiet since I had decided not to repeat anything because I didn't know anymore who or what he was. He had dropped to the floor like he had lost all his energy but tried to crawl to me, and he was extending his arms trying to touch me even though he was far away that this was impossible. But he was doing it more like out of desperation. I could see his body for the first time, at least what was visible through the darkness. This thin skeleton-like arm stretched, and his arm had almost no muscle on it, just bone, and I could see his pointy spine covered by his colorless and almost transparent skin. He looked up at me, and his face was very different from the face that I remembered, because he had this expression of fear, and like a reptile following desperately his first prey in days, he moved violently, almost instinctively of survival towards me. His eyes were bigger and bulgier, almost too big for his skull. They were big and wide, completely open, looking at me and begging me with his "Look, you have to help me." He yelled at me. The people that were in the room with him had disappeared now. He kept asking for help, sounding more desperate every time he asked. "Help me, help me." He was yelling, looking directly at me, stretching his hand, and I realized he was disappearing. If he was my brother, there was no way he could hurt me in any way, I thought, so I took the coin and put it below my son that was sleeping. I looked at my brother that was still on the floor, and I could see a smile on his face. A smile I couldn't interpret and never seen him do before, and then he just disappeared, going back into the darkness of the room. Time has passed, and I still remember his face of desperation. I have never seen someone looking like that, and sometimes when I look at my son, there is a part of me that can see him in there, but I now regret having done this, since I have seen my son also do that same smile that my brother did at the end, and I don't know if he was actually my brother, or if there is someone else in there now. Black-eyed children. I was walking to my car as quickly as I could. I checked my watch. It was 7:15 p.m. I shook my head.
My phone rang.
The screen showed that it was my wife calling, right on time. "You better be close to the restaurant," she said. The tone in her voice left me wondering if she knew that I was just leaving the office. I stayed silent. "Damn it, Jack." She cursed quietly. "I'm already here. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much work I would have to get done today. And we're still not on pace to make our deadline. The whole team is working late.
Not just me.
And I can't be the only person leaving on time when my subordinates are staying late." I pleaded. "How long until you get here?" she asked angrily. "If I run every red light, I can be there in 30 minutes, I told her. She didn't answer for a long while. I got into my car, and just as I started to wonder if she had hung up on me, my car picked up the Bluetooth. "Okay, just hurry. It's bad enough the waiter has asked me twice if I was waiting for someone," she instructed. "I'm sorry, babe. I'll be there as soon as I can," I said. I shifted my car into reverse and started to back up. A loud bang on my window made me slam on the brakes. I threw it into the park and turned around to see if I hit something or, worse, someone.
I didn't see anything.
I turned back around in my seat to find 2 children standing next to my door. I jumped at the shock. They both just stood there. Judging by their size, I would guess they were about 9 or 10. I had this terrible feeling in my stomach that there was something wrong. But they were children, probably lost. I told myself. I cracked the window just enough to ask if I could help them. "Can I use your phones?"
One of the kids asked.
The child's tone had a tinge of darkness to it. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. But I reached for my phone and unlocked it. When I looked back up at the child, I noticed they had both moved closer. They both stared down at their feet. Their hoods up over their head cast shadows over their faces. It almost appeared they didn't have any faces at all. At that point, I had this unyielding sense of fear building that I couldn't justify. "Is there someone you'd like me to call for you?" I asked. Then one of the kids raised his head slightly. The shadows that covered his face parted as the new angle of his hood allowed me to see his face. But his eyes were still hidden in the shadows. They appeared to be pitch black. Not that they were missing, but he had no iris, no whites in his eyes at all. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and the boy seemed to notice my fear. He lowered his head again. "We need to use your phone," he pleaded. I recovered and scolded myself quietly for allowing a trick of the light to scare me so badly. "Who can I call for you? Just give me their number," I said, my hand ready to dial. Maybe it was the fact that the kids wouldn't look at me. Perhaps it was the fact that the kids were out of place in the business district after sundown. But something inside me was screaming not to give them my phone. "If you can't give me the number, I'm sure you can go inside the lobby and ask the security guard to let you call your parents," I said, and pointed toward the lobby door. Neither one of them turned to look. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I put my car in reverse. I was eager to get the hell out of there. I was eager to get away from these children. I looked in the rearview mirror to make sure I was clear. A loud bang stopped me in my tracks. For a split second, I thought I hit someone, and then I heard it again. Both of the boys were slapping their hands, palm down, on my driver's side window. A third time, a fourth time, in unison, they slapped my window. "Can we just get in your car? We need a ride," they asked in a monotone and utterly unsettling tone. I slammed the gas down and backed up without even looking, and then I slammed into drive and peeled out. I was a good 10 minutes down the road before my heart stopped trying to beat out of my chest. I was so worked up that I almost missed my exit. I wanted to get home so bad. I had forgotten about date night. I met my wife at her favorite restaurant and we ate. She was initially angry about me being late. We hadn't had much time alone since we had our son. He was 4 now, and this was probably our 5th date night in that 4 years. Her mood switched from being angry to laughing at me as I explained why I was so late. I told her everything about the kids. "So, you were scared of a couple of kids? They could still be out there, looking for their parents?" She heckled me. She knew how scared I was. There was something wrong with them. But she didn't believe it. At least not at that point. Our son was staying at the babysitter's house all night, so we had the house to ourselves. It was 3 in the morning when we heard the knock at the door. I woke up first and just sat in bed and listened. There was a faint, steady knock at the door. In threes. Knock, knock, knock. And then a pause followed by another set of 3. Knock, knock, knock. Then my wife woke up. "Do you hear that?" she asked.
"Yeah."
"There is someone at the front door," I replied. My heart sped up. I knew before I did that it was them. My wife sat up and grabbed her phone. "It's after 3 in the morning. Who could it be?" she asked. "And they didn't hit the doorbell," she added. She opened the doorbell app on her phone to reveal an empty porch. There was nobody there. She showed me. The knocking continued. And then I saw them. There was a faint silhouette in the darkness. "Zoom in there," I said, and pointed to the corner of the steps. She did, and we could see them. The 2 boys were standing in the shadows. One of them kicked the steps. Knock, knock, knock. My wife looked at me. "There is no way those kids followed you home. This has to be a joke," she said. She stood up and put on her robe. I did too. We both made our way downstairs. We argued as we walked. She wanted to open the door. I didn't. Knock, knock, knock. "We can't open the door," I told her. "They're just kids playing a prank," she replied. Knock, knock, knock. Finally, we reached the door, and my wife undid the locks and swung it open. We both took a step back as soon as we did. The kids were no longer standing in the shadow but had moved up to the first step. The only light was from behind us, flowing out of the house. It was enough for us to see the 2 small figures staring at us, but not enough to see any detail. "What do you want?" my wife asked. I was flipping the light switch on and off for the porch light. It wouldn't come on, but I knew it had been on when we got home. "Can we come inside?" the kids asked in unison. I could see that my wife had gone pale. She finally believed me. Something wasn't right. The kids both took a step to the next step. "Can we call the police for you? Are you lost?" she asked them. They stepped up to the porch, and then they were close enough. Just 3 feet away, their faces were fully illuminated. The light revealed the same thing I thought I had seen earlier. Wide eyes, black as coal. "Hey," began to smile at us. "We need to come inside. We need help," they said in unison as if they shared the same thoughts. I moved my wife out of the way and slammed the door. My hands fumbled for the locks as I looked through the peephole. "I'm calling the cops," I yelled through the door. My wife still had her phone in her hand. She started to dial 911. "Wait," I said. "They're leaving," I told her. The kids walked back into the street and disappeared into the night. The next day we slept in and then picked up our son. It was a pretty uneventful day, at least until 3 a.m. I woke to the sound of knocking. I sat up, half asleep. I heard my wife tell me it was just our son. "I'll get it,"
she told me.
I went back to sleep. That was about 10 minutes ago. I noticed she didn't come back to bed, and I decided to check the security cameras on my phone. My wife is lying on the floor dead. There is blood everywhere. Standing at her feet are the 2 boys. And next to them is my son. His eyes were black as coal. As I'm writing this, I can hear them walking down the hall toward me. For the love of God, if you see black-eyed children, do not talk to them. Do not give them anything, and please, do not let them into your house. Camping nightmare. The wind howled through the trees, tugging at the tent flaps as I lay awake on my sleeping bag. My dad's soft snores came from the corner of the tent, a steady rhythm that should have lulled me to sleep, but something felt wrong. I couldn't shake this creeping feeling, like eyes were watching from the shadows just beyond the campfire's dying light. The trip had started out great. Dad and I hiked for hours through the thick forest, Kodak bounding ahead, his tail wagging like crazy. I was so excited. It was our first camping trip since I turned 13, and I felt like I was finally old enough to be trusted on my own out here. The air smelled like pine and earth, and for a while, everything felt peaceful. But now, lying here in the dark, something was different. I couldn't hear the forest anymore. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence, thick and heavy. I propped myself up on my elbows and glanced toward Kodak. His ears were perked, his body tense. He stared at the entrance of the tent, his lips curling back into a snarl. I froze. "Dad," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Dad, wake up." He groaned, but didn't stir. Kodak growled low in his throat, and that's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside, crunching on the dry leaves. Not like an animal either. These were heavy, deliberate. Someone or something was out there. I slowly reached for the flashlight next to my sleeping bag, my heart pounding so loud I was sure whatever was outside could hear it. My fingers wrapped around the cold metal, and I switched it on, the beam cutting through the darkness inside the tent. Kodak stood up now, his growl growing louder. The footsteps stopped. I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to move, but I had to see. I crawled toward the tent flap, my hands shaking, and slowly unzipped it just enough to peek out. Nothing. The campfire had completely gone out, and the moon barely lit up the clearing. The trees loomed like dark sentinels around us, and everything was still. Too still. I could feel the sweat dripping down the back of my neck. And then, there it was again. The footsteps, this time moving quickly. They circled around the tent, faster and faster, like whatever it was knew I was watching. I yanked the flashlight toward the sound, my pulse racing, but the light revealed nothing. Just more darkness. My breathing hitched when the footsteps stopped abruptly, right at the entrance of the tent. Kodak barked, a sharp, fierce sound that seemed to echo through the trees.
"Dad."
I hissed louder this time, shaking him frantically. He finally woke up, groggy and annoyed. "What's going on?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Someone's outside," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "Something," He sat up quickly, his expression shifting from sleepy confusion to alert concern. He grabbed the hatchet we brought for firewood and motioned for me to stay behind him. We listened. The wind had picked up again, rustling the trees, but the footsteps were gone. Dad opened the tent flap fully, his hatchet at the ready, and we both stepped out into the cool night air. Kodak was already out, sniffing the ground, still on edge. We scanned the area. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling lingered, thick and oppressive. Dad let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. "It's probably just an animal," he said, though his voice was tight. "Let's get the fire going again, okay?" I nodded, though I didn't believe him. Something wasn't right. I could feel it, but I helped him gather more kindling, my eyes constantly scanning the shadows. When we got the fire going again, the flickering flames seemed to push the darkness back, but not completely. I felt like we were being watched, like the forest itself was alive and waiting. We sat by the fire for a long time, neither of us speaking much. Dad tried to reassure me, cracking a few jokes, but I could tell he was just as uneasy. Eventually, the exhaustion took over, and he convinced me to get some rest. Reluctantly, I crawled back into the tent, Kodak lying beside me, his body warm against mine. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I woke up to the sound of heavy breathing. I bolted upright, my heart hammering in my chest, and looked around. The tent was empty. Dad was gone. "Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling. No response. I grabbed the flashlight and stumbled out of the tent, Kodak right behind me. The fire had gone out again, and the darkness seemed even thicker than before. I called out again, my voice cracking with fear, but there was no answer. Then I saw it, movement in the trees. A figure, tall and shadowy, just barely visible in the moonlight. It was too far away to make out clearly, but it was watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, cold and malevolent. I shined the flashlight toward it, but the beam seemed to bend around the figure, like the darkness was swallowing it whole. My blood ran cold, and I backed away slowly, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the flashlight. Kodak barked, his hackles raised, and the figure began to move closer, gliding through the trees with unnatural speed. I turned and ran, my legs barely able to keep up with the terror that surged through me. Kodak stayed close, his growls echoing in the night. I didn't stop running until I burst into a clearing, panting and terrified. But when I looked back, the figure was gone. The forest was still again, but that didn't make me feel any safer. And then I heard it, a faint whisper on the wind, like a voice calling my name. But it wasn't my dad's voice. It was something else. Something wrong. I never found my dad that night. When the sun finally rose, the search party arrived, but they found no trace of him. No footprints, no sign of struggle. Just an empty tent and a dying campfire. To this day, I don't know what was out there in the woods that night. But I know one thing for sure. I'll never go camping again.